Good morning. My name is Rachel Moore, and I'm going to be talking about the great missionary Don Richardson. And he wrote this book called The Peace Child about his time with his family serving in New Guinea. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of backstory about him. He grew up in Canada and was born in the year 1935. He grew up as a non-Christian, but shortly after he became a Christian, he attended the Prairie Bible Institute in Alberta, Canada. There he received his calling to ministry while he was sitting with the student body in a chapel-like service, honestly, where he heard this quote from Ebenezer G. Vine, who was the secretary of the RBMU, which is the Regions Beyond Missionary Union. Mr. Vine said these words: "You may be called upon to make the first advance into the midst of entire tribes that have never known any kind of governmental control, where people are a law unto themselves and where savagery is a way of life. You must learn to make yourself and your message understood in the medium of languages never before learned by an outsider. There will be no dictionaries, grammars, or primers to help you. You must produce your own." While Don was there listening to Vine talk about this task that seemed just incredibly hard, he just felt the Lord continuing to call him to this ministry. But he had a lot of doubts about it because he'd only been a Christian for about 2 to 3 years. And so he prayed to the Lord and just went before him and was like, "God, if this is what you want me to do, then I'm going to go." And this is actually what he wrote in the book. He says, "With Christ as its center, the universe began to make sense. By serving him, life could have eternal meaning. Knowing him and sharing him with others would henceforth be my consuming purpose. And if sharing him where his name was already known was a privilege, sharing him where his name had never been heard must be immeasurably greater privilege." I just think that's so beautiful and so amazing, because this task that is before him and that you read in this book was hard, and I can't imagine doing what he did and having the courage that he had. Just in the 3 years that he was a Christian, I feel that he did more than I've done in my entire life. And so just his life in itself is so much of a challenge to me personally. But while he was at this institute, he met his wife, Carol, and they knew each other for about 3 years while she was becoming a certified nurse, and he was studying and serving as a pastor, a youth pastor. And they spent these 3 years becoming friends, and then they got married. And shortly after they got married, they ended up going to a linguistic program. And while they were in this program, they got cleared to go to New Guinea. So in March of 1962, with their newborn Stephen, their first of 3 sons, they traveled over to New Guinea. So when they got to New Guinea, the Richardsons were staying with a bunch of missionaries that were over there. They'd been flown around the islands to be able to see just what kind of terrain they were going to be serving in, the jungle and the swampy areas with alligators and all these kind of diseases and things that they had never known before. It was just a really big culture shock. They got to witness some of the missionaries that had already been serving there, how they interacted with the tribes people and how they were learning different languages. So it was really good for them to adjust. While they were with these missionaries, they got together, Don and Carol got together with these missionaries, and they agreed to serve specifically the tribe of Sawi people. And so Don went off and left Carol and the newborn there with some missionaries, and he went off and tried to find where they were going to build their home, where they were going to live amongst the people. So they did that and built their home, and it was pretty amazing, the story that they tell about just how crazy it was during that time, that most of the natives that lived there had never seen any Caucasian people, let alone Caucasian men. So they had a new name for them. They called them Tuans. And so it was pretty cool to just see the interest of the people for the two aunts, because not only did he come and wanted to talk to them and use them to build his house, but he would give them gifts in exchange. They would give them different types of tools that they had never seen before, and they would come on these boats with motors. And so the natives there would think that one of their gods was going to cause this big huge storm or something because the engine was so loud. And so it was kind of a shock for both of the natives and for the Richardsons, just to see what was going on and on both sides. But they took several months of getting adjusted and building a house. And so once they finally built a house, the Richardsons lived there among several different, I wouldn't say villages, but it was different tribes people. They were split up in their own groups. And so when Don and Carol moved to their house, these different tribes people that had been back deep in the jungles came out and wanted to live right there around their house. And so Don got to go up into the man house, is what they called it, and speak to the leaders of the different tribes for years. That's how he learned the language. That's how he learned it well enough to be able to translate some of the Bible into their language and to teach them. But it was a really, really slow process, and it took him years before they even understood the gospel. One thing that Carol and Don noticed that was just crazy to me to even think that people can still live like this in the world, but they said in the author's introduction, in 1962, Carol and I went to live among the Sawi. As we studied their language and probed into their legends and customs, we found that we were living and working among a people who honored treachery as an ideal. In many of the legends that the Sawi people tell to their children around the campfires, the heroes are men who formed friendships with the express purpose of later betraying the befriended one to be killed and eaten. The Sawi expression for this practice is to fatten with friendship for the slaughter. In recognizing that the idealization of treachery was a part of the Sawi view of life, we understood why we felt a certain culture shock in living among them. Yet we had been sent there by God to win them to overcome, within a few short years, this idealization of treachery, which had been part of their way of life over centuries, possibly millenniums of time. So not only were they dealing with culture shock of living in North America to moving to this place that was swampy and a jungle land where they lived in a tilted hut that was off the ground, and faced with all of the bugs and diseases that were all the bugs and diseases that were going to be new to their bodies. But these people that they lived among, treachery was something that was looked upon as an ideal. It was something that they strove for. It says they wanted to fatten with friendship for the slaughter. The first part of this book tells of one of the tribe's stories of how they befriended another village leader, and over months they worked and developed this friendship so that one day they would kill him, and they ate him. And so I can't imagine when you are finally amongst these people and you realize that this is what they do. And so it's, I don't know, it would be hard to be like, well, am I just their friend that they're waiting to eat? Or am I a friend that's real to them? I don't know, that would be really hard. But as time went on, the Sawi, they liked the two aunts, as they called them, and they liked learning from them. They liked getting the tools in return for things that they did. But there were a lot of hardships that came with developing friendships and living in a place they'd never known. Vine discussed this, and so this is a list of different hardships that they faced. You will encounter customs and beliefs which will baffle you, but which must be understood if you are to succeed. You will try to treat loathsome tropical diseases and run the risk of being blamed for the death of your patient if you fail. You must prepare to endure loneliness, weariness, and frustration with fortitude. Most of all, you must be prepared in the strength of the Lord to do battle with the prince of darkness, who, having held these hundreds of tribes captive these many thousands of years, is not about to give them up without a fight. Man, they went through so much to get these people to understand what the gospel was, and the language barrier alone was hard, let alone them actually being able to share the gospel story. And Judas was the one that they looked at as the victor there. He was the one that fattened with friendship and gave Jesus over to the slaughter. And so when they first were telling these stories, I can't imagine their hearts were just so hurt by them not understanding the beauty of the story. So years into living with these people, the villages and different tribe sections began to fight a lot, and Don and Carol were just really worried about the people, and they didn't want them to fight. That was not what they wanted. They didn't want bloodshed on their behalf. And so Don and Carol had prayed over their time there, and they went to the tribesmen and said, if you're going to continue to fight, then we're going to leave and go to another Sawi village and we are going to just try to help y'all keep the peace. But the village tribesmen, they didn't want them to leave, and so they talked it over and came to Don and Carol and said, we are going to make peace together. And Don and Carol were like, okay, how do you plan to do that? And so a day later, the village tribesmen went through this ceremony where they traded this thing called a peace child. And so Don and Carol had never seen this happen before. And so every tribesman would trade their son to another tribesman, like in a circle. So everyone traded a tribesman, and it connected all of them together. And by trading this child, they were now bound together by this blood relative that they traded, and it bound them to peace that no other tradition could overcome. And if something happened that was going to break the peace, then those tribesmen were like the advocates for those childs, reminding them of this bond that they had taken together. Don and Carol had been looking for this redemptive analogy that they could use to help the men understand the gospel. And using this one little small act, Don was able to share the gospel and show that Jesus was the peace child for all people, that he was sent on the Lord's behalf to redeem us and to help keep the peace. And unlike their peace children that could die and those bonds could be broken, Jesus would never die. And so this peace was going to be everlasting. It was such a beautiful story, and God used it to just, he set this all up before Don and Carol even knew that they were going to go to New Guinea. This was something instilled in the tribe's people. And Don prayed this prayer. He said, I thank you, my Father, for laying the groundwork for our ministry to these people. The Sawi were strangers to our Judeo-Christian heritage, yet you so providentially ordained these redemptive analogies within their culture ages ago, so that one day we would find and use them for your glory. You were concerned not only to send messengers, but also to prepare a culture to receive their message. Redemptive analogies are crucial to reaching people like this, as we've learned in this class and we've learned in others in the ICS program. And Don, his story is just amazing, and I can't think of a more empowering story that just reaches down into your heart and grips you and says, don't you want to go to people that have never heard the gospel and explain to them in a way that they would be able to understand the beauty of this gift that God has given us. So yeah.